Excellent. Good morning, all. Welcome to the May Working Lands Enterprise Board meeting. First item on the agenda is to vote on the meeting minutes from April 21st. To get that up for discussion, we'll need a motion and a second.
Moved. This is Alan.
Thank you, Alan. Do we have a second?
Elizabeth will second.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Are there any corrections, comments, questions? All right, not seeing any. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. All right, motion carries. And I'm going to turn it over to Elizabeth because I think we're going to move on to our presentation.
Yeah,
Next.
they're
coming at
so
9:15.
yes, exactly. They are going to join at 9:15. So for folks who have been on the board for a bit, they're going to Kevin, Channel, and Roger. Is it Osnachuk, Ellen? How do you say Roger's last name?
I'm not sure.
Okay, but Ostenchuk, I think, who are the managing partners of a company called Vermont Cattlemen, have spent the past 3.5 years, a little bit more, doing a very deep dive, very hands-on research around beef on dairy, both like best practices for different sires, like different types of beef on dairy crosses, feeding regimes. So a lot of like deep dive into the technical aspects of raising the best, most marketable beef cow on a dairy sire. But they have also done a lot of work on just looking at the supply chain and understanding, what Vermont would need to really develop a beef supply chain, so that the original goal was for fewer calves to be leaving the state and to actually have them raised up here to build up the beef, the Vermont's beef industry. I think they will be talking to some of the market changes that have thrown their original plan of keeping calves in Vermont, thrown a lot of wrenches in their plan. Mostly the price of calves having skyrocketed. And I can't remember right now what the cost was when they started the project versus now, but I think it's something like 3 to 4 times more for a baby calf than when they started. And that's very driven by the big, meat producers in the Midwest. So we're at the point now where their research is coming to an end. They raised over 100 animals and finished them like throughout the lifespan of the project, and that's what the data is drawing from. So they're going to, really introduce the board, and I think there are 2 workshops coming up and 1 webinar, which all of you are invited to join. It was included in the board packet. So 2 in-person on-farm workshops that are going to be targeting farmers. So, that's going to be focused on, what's the research and findings that can help farmers optimize their beef on dairy work or get into beef on dairy. But you're welcome to join. And today, they're really going to be focusing more on what they see as the needs. They are going to share some of the research, but what they see as the needs for a beef on dairy supply chain, or really like a beef supply chain in Vermont. Ellen, go ahead.
Yeah, I just thought I'd give a little bit more background if that's okay, since we have so many new members. So this project originated early, there was a bunch of work done through Vermont Farm to Plate to identify the need for more understanding of the costs of raising beef, because as we have lost more dairy farms and dairy animals, a lot of dairy farmers bring on cattle. And in particular, there was a lot of work done in the late teens to understand the cost of grass-fed versus grain-fed meat and beef in particular in the state, and there was workshops held around around this topic with a lot of different beef farmers. Kevin Channel comes out of having been, he's in real estate, but he also spent many years as a farm viability advisor at the Intervale. So he was working directly with farms and realizing that there was a real opportunity in the marketplace, but also a real need, especially for dairy farmers, to have an additional revenue stream. And so the part of the purpose, or the big why behind this pilot project, was to understand the cost dynamics. And everybody's like, if you're going to put on beef animals, we want to understand, how do you get a premium in the marketplace? And can we take advantage of the Vermont brand and the Vermont way of raising things? In addition, one of the big things that has always been the case, is that the variability of the meat being produced for the marketplace can vary from farm to farm based on the types of feed that is provided, the semen that is used, the genetics of these animals and such. And so in the theory here of change here was, if we can provide a protocol for best feeding, best genetics, and we create a superior product across multiple farms, so there's a consistency of the product being produced, right? Because if you're a chef, or if you're a chef and you're willing to spend money for good cuts of steak, for instance, you want to have consistency throughout every time you put it on somebody's plate. So the intention of this project was to figure out, could we do that? Could that be built in a way that then delivered back a premium to the farms that participated? And could we help with maintaining a strong genetic pool, vetted genetics, a process for nutritional protocols that were consistent across all farms? So Kevin came to the Jobs Fund and to the Working Lands Board and said, I'd like to do this. I've got this vet that I want to work with. We've tested this idea with a bunch of farms. There's some folks that want to participate. We just need a vehicle for getting some more funding to actually set this up as a 4-year pilot project, because that's how long this is going to take. So this ask to the Working Lands Board came at a time when the board had more money. It was back during the era days of the COVID extra funds. So the Sustainable Jobs Fund served in essence as the fiscal sponsor. So the funds came from the board to the Jobs Fund, and then we managed that. Jay Claro, our Farm to Plate director, managed that on a day-to-day level with Kevin, had regular meetings with Kevin. And there was also an additional $200,000 that, again, ERA funds that the Agency of Agriculture put up for this project. So in total, I think it was about a $600,000 pilot project, which is really unprecedented for this board. So just so you know, like, there's a lot behind this, and the intention was to, in essence, test the market, test the theory, and then, if successful, it would launch a new business, which is what Vermont Cattlemen is. So it actually has launched a new business. These products are in the marketplace in a particular way, which you'll hear about. But you should know that without this money from WLEB, none of this would have happened. So, and it was really kind of unprecedented. And these were all contracts that were through the Jobs Fund and then directly to Vermont Cattlemen. So I just wanted to provide that extra background, because this was a unique, in essence, one-off opportunity, and it was because we had this extra funding through the pandemic era period.
So Ellen, thank you. That's like such a better introduction. And thank you for like reminding me honestly of the history. Can you also share like what are you listening for today? Like what are the things that you're excited about hearing now that we're at the end? I mean, I think it's some of the things that you just mentioned, but I think that might also help the board
Yeah,
as
I
we
think
transition in.
listening for that, the number of farms that have participated, the number of animals that have been raised, the types of markets they're going into. I think a big one is understanding that markets change. And just because you have, and this is a case of a pilot, the conditions of the market at the start are different than the conditions now. And so how adept have they been at pivoting their business model to adapt to the changing marketplace? Because we see this with our business, the businesses that we invest in through WLEB all the time, right? Lime green heat is another example that was like it took many years, and some of the changes or some of the conditions were such that it's because the market changed. And so understanding the level of patience that sometimes we need to exhibit as a board, I think is an important thing to remember. And also I think this is a really good example of where we took a big risk, right? We've never done something like this. And we decided, you know what? We have these extra funds. The legislature wanted us to take some risks. This seems like a really good bet. Let's invest in this and not do the peanut butter schmear thing, but like really put the money towards this over consistently over multiple years and really give this a shot. Had we done a one-off at 100,000, this would not have worked. I mean, just to be clear. So I think, Elizabeth, that's what I'd be listening for and inquiring about.
And I think what Ellen's referring to is that the board, and this was pre myself, but they committed to 4 years of funding is what Ellen is saying. And the project only ended up needing 3 years of funding due to the funds from the legislature. But this project was consistently funded by the board for 3 years, which was unique. Yeah, so thanks also, Ellen, for flagging that sort of unique
Yeah,
commitment.
thanks for reminding me that it was actually 500,000 because it was 200,000 from the legislature through the agency's budget, and then yeah, three years of 100 each. Yeah, so 500,000. So we've never done this before. So a good test case.
And I believe that they are in the lobby. Are they not? Or no, maybe not.
Yeah, I don't see them.
Okay. Let me.
Well, the only other thing I will say that is just context here is, like I said, through Vermont Farm to Plate, we identified the meat supply chain as a big need to do some more real intentional work to develop. This project then actually connected with the meat supply chain group within Farm to Plate as almost like an advisory group to provide input, to give updates to. So it's also nested within a larger community of practice of folks that are generally interested in the state of the meat supply chain. So it's not like this thing that's just off by itself doing its own thing. It's actually part of a larger whole.
They're having a trick with they're having trouble with the link. So hold on one second. I'm sending them a new link. Okay, they should. Should be joining any second. They're trying to join. And also just to flag that the full report was in the packet.
All right, I'll cut off here.
All right, success. Welcome, Kevin. Ellen already did an excellent introduction to the vision for the beef on dairy research and work. And so I think you can just take it away. We've introduced you and Roger, but I think it would be great for you to offer another brief introduction of yourself.
Sure.
I think given the slightly late start, we'll skip doing introductions of the board. You're going to see many familiar faces from the last time you presented to this group, and then a few new members. But thank you so much for joining us. And
Sure. Yeah, let me just reach out to Roger, make sure he has the new link. I was texting him earlier. Let me just send him a quick note. Hi, folks. Thanks for your patience. I had the wrong link. I apologize. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, great. All right. Well, thanks again for your meeting time. And thanks, Ellen, for introducing the project, giving some background on it. My plan today is to simply, in a cursory way, sort of hit the highlights of our report that we submitted. I'm assuming a lot of that was pretty straightforward, but I want to spend a little time putting together some highlights. First, I want to just thank you again for meeting. I want to also thank the participating farms, the Brysons at Dayona, the Wagners at Green Dream Farm, and Robert Stickney at Divinity. Those folks have been with us from the beginning. There's been others as well, but they've kind of come and gone depending on their ability to stay involved. Also want to thank Bar R Wagyu for their donation to get us started on genetics, as well as Vermont Wagyu, Sheila Patinkin. They've been integral in getting us started with the genetics. We also want to thank vendors, Phoenix Feeds, Agway of Newport, Poulin Grain, and Cargill. They've been integral in this whole process the past 3 or 4 years. A little background on kind of how we got started in all this. I don't know how familiar you are with the progression of thought over the past 9 years, looking back over this. We started seeing severe contraction in the dairy industry back in 2017. I was working at Farm Credit at the time, and I know it's a 20-year trend of decline in numbers of dairy farms, but we were seeing it happen precipitously, and so much so that there at the bank anyway, we were seeing the portfolio, the overall portfolio at Yankee at that time was dropping below 50%. And that was the first time in, I believe, Yankees history that they had dropped below 50% in their dairy portfolio. Overall portfolio, less than 50% was making up the made up from dairy accounts. So I was there to witness.
Kevin's rejoining. He joined and then he cut back out.
I'm sorry. There we go.
we are.
All
You
right.
got you? All
Yeah,
right. So we
I'm with-
also Roger and Jake have joined as
Okay.
well. Thank you. If
Great.
it's easier, Kevin, reception wise, if you want to shut your video off just to keep more clarity so you're not cutting in and out, feel free to do so.
Is the audio clear or no?
It was cutting in and out a little bit before and then we lost you.
Okay. All right. Okay, let me try it again. I'm not sure what happened. So we were seeing some of that at the bank, and then in addition to that, Chuck Ross came out with this. I don't know if you all read his white paper back in 2018, but it was compelling that there needs to be some strategy employed if we're going to replace some of this loss of dairy economic activity. And you know, as I listened to him present on that, read through the paper, and considered my place, I guess, in the industry professionally, I thought, you know, there's got to be a way to diversify or to explore other ways for dairies to make money, because they were subject obviously to severely depressed prices in the milk category. 2018 was really bad, and they were producing, and still do sometimes, below cost. They were producing, it cost them more to produce milk than they were getting paid, which is unsustainable. And so there's got to be a way for them to think about diversifying in their operations. Well, beef became quickly a good opportunity, as we thought things through. However, there was a lot of inconsistency, and the demand for beef in general requires absolute consistency. That's where the market's at. It requires consistency on weights when you group the animals. It requires consistency on grade and yield. And we were really constrained by the diversity of breeds and, you know, dairy crosses that were in the beef industry in Vermont. And then there was kind of a breakthrough. In 2019, we saw Holstein USA come out with a partnership with Simmental USA called Wholesim. And they were using big data. This is 2019 when big data just started to kind of emerge. And they were partnering to suggest that they would come out every 6 weeks and update sire recommendations for beef on dairy based on data from the carcass quality that they were seeing at the kill floor. And they were partnering with these breed associations, which you never would see beef and dairy even talking back then. So this was a real breakthrough. We thought, okay, this is a really good opportunity. I was talking to some other folks at the time. One of them was Roger. He and I were working together with Joe Emenheiser on some sire selection work that Roger and Sheila were working on at Vermont Wagyu. And we got a little bit of funding. This is when we first started working with Vermont Sustainable Jobs. Jake, we were looking for some funding for using ultrasound to test bulls to see if they had early capacity to layer in intermuscular fat, and if that was a determining factor for sire selection. And as it turns out, it's a highly heritable trait, this intermuscular fat, which is marbling. It highly impacts the quality of your beef. And so we spent a year or so studying some of her young sires so that she could make early decisions on whether or not to keep them for beef, or keep them for breeding, or to send them to the beef division where she was raising and finishing beef. Anyway, during that process, we did some taste tests. And what was remarkable in the taste tests, when we had all our stakeholders present, was that the Holstein on Wagyu was the preferred beef, the preferred steak, as opposed to Wagyu over Angus, which up to that time was kind of the gold standard. The only drawback was the ribeye area wasn't quite the right shape, but we were seeing like people preferred beef on dairy, essentially, and particularly Wagyu over dairy. And at the time, we were exploring certain markets and different premiums available for high grade, being choice or prime or above. And there was quite a premium. We're talking 20 to 30% premium if you were able to achieve prime grade at that time. So Wagyu became a good option for beef on dairy. And then we discovered some early innovators, one of which is Mark Bryson at Dayona Farm. He had been using Wagyu over his heifers so that he guaranteed calving ease. He didn't want to put Angus on them because he was having trouble with calving. And that compromises the milk check, right? So no dairyman wants to put a bull on their cows if it's going to compromise the milk check. So he was using Wagyu and was able to scoop up refusals off of his feed floor and feed out a small group. You know, he had 40, 50, sometimes 60 animals annually that he was producing for finished beef animals on refusals. We thought this is pretty innovative. Here's a good partner to join in this discussion and conversation about how to use how to capitalize on the beef on dairy back in 2019, 2020. Well, all this work was kind of suspended during COVID, but in the fall of 2020, we reached out to Vermont Community Foundation, and they funded what's called a readiness survey. Is the market ready? Are producers ready to participate in a beef on dairy program in the aggregate? And so we worked for a year working with, again, got a sponsor from Vermont Sustainable Jobs Fund. Thank you, Ellen. Thank you, Jake. And they sponsored us in this, and they granted us some funding for just spending time with buyers and participant producers to just evaluate the readiness. So we did that in 2020, 2021, and discovered that, yes, there's plenty of participants wanting to ramp up beef. There's custom producers. There's dairymen, innovators wanting to produce more beef on dairy if there were markets ready for it. And then the buyers, we talked to both Cargill and some of the folks at Cambridge. We had a feeder grader. There's actually guys hired at those sale barns to grade feeders. He was there in the interviews as well. And they basically said, look, unless beef improves in Vermont, we're not interested in buying here anymore. It's getting so poor. And we realized, boy, if you're going to capitalize on the beef market, you've got to have good quality. You got to have consistency. Here's an opportunity with these open gestations, whether it be heifers or your lower 25 to 30% in your herd that you're not producing for replacements, you can capitalize on those open gestations and produce a good quality beef animal. We think. We didn't know, and so we found that we needed some to pilot something, and so we started to discuss, okay, how do we put together a pilot program to test the markets, to actually produce? Can we get consistent quality? And then how do we compare those breed differences over time? So that's essentially what we've done. So that's a little background. I've joined with Roger and Mark, particularly on Vermont Cattlemen, to explore this. I want to give Roger, he's with us, to give him a chance to explain a little his background on beef and the Beef on Dairy initiative over the past several years. Raj, take it away.
Yeah, a few of you probably heard my bio before, but I'm actually grew up in Western Canada, and on a beef and grain operation. We used to calve out 200, 300 cows, and that's how my family made a living, was in the beef industry. But I moved away and went to veterinary school in the East Coast, and in 1999 moved to Walpole, New Hampshire, and I've practiced veterinary medicine. I did mixed practice, primarily dairy and equine, for 6 years, and then I've worked for myself since 2006 doing equine and dairy and basically all the beef animals in my area. And then I think it was in 2013 or 14, as a part-time gig, I started managing Sheila's Vermont Wagyu full blood Wagyu herd. And we took that from 40 cows to near 800 and developed the beef side of that. And because I didn't have enough things to do, I played around because I was always, just like Kevin had said, there'd always, they talk about beefers and the poor quality of the beef production in Vermont and New Hampshire, yet we have the best land, the best grass. We really have good weather to produce feed. We're somewhat climate protected. We always can produce feed, but we were producing really poor animals. And the beef on dairy, the Wagyu dairy, I got to know Mark Bryson, was just, to me, was an absolute eye opener as to why we're not pursuing that more. And also the idea that almost all the beef cattle leave the Northeast and leave Vermont, and then we buy back to feed 50 million people within a 5-hour radius of here. All that beef is fed in the Midwest and then shipped back to us. To like, why do those animals all have to leave here? And through our program, I'm doing all that, but my heart is really in seeing success in the small farms and keeping money and keeping agriculture going in the Northeast, because I just saw such a huge missed opportunity. And through what we've done and in the project, if you read through the report, we've actually proven some of the concepts and shown where market potential is, and that we need to embrace new technologies, work together in cooperatives, get help all the way around. But there's just such a giant missed opportunity of us not producing our own beef here, and it can be done if we implement the right health practices, the right feed programs, the right marketing strategies. And we've kind of proved it with our pencils on how to make it work for people. And I could probably go on and on and on about it, get on my soapbox about that, but it's just like we need to do it. That's kind of my bio right there, that we're missing a big opportunity. I think you got to put your mic back on, Kevin.
Let's take us back to 2020. Thanks, Raj. 2020, Roger and I were working on this ultrasound project over at Vermont Wagyu, defining sires. Joe Emenheiser started to talk about heritable traits and how crossbred vigor works in beef on dairy crosses. In a single crossbreeding, the highly heritable traits, the positive highly heritable traits, have the most probability for transferring to that progeny. Okay, so what that means is if you take a dairy animal and you take a Wagyu animal, the marbling and growth potentially will get transferred to that dam, and the progeny of that animal will have the frame size of a Holstein. So now you have a Holstein crossed with a Wagyu, or a Holstein crossed with an Angus, with the ability to grow as much with as much probability, with positive traits as you can possibly have crossbreeding. As you get further down the line, it's less likely that you're going to have those highly heritable traits transfer evenly. Penn State started to do some work. They published some early results. We saw their results where they compared different animals on Holstein, Charolais. They compared Angus, Simmental, and what they deduced is that the marketability of black animals made the Angus and Sim Angus crossbreeds the most profitable. Now, when you look at their study, it was a little bit of a slapdash, a little surprising coming out of Penn State, but it was necessary because it got us out of the gate on some published data that helped us define what is a successful beef on dairy program. And what they found is that 25% of 100 animals, 25% typically are going to be primarily looking like beef conformity. One generation allowed that transfer of heterogeneous traits. so that the 25% look like beef animals, finish like beef animals. You could hardly tell the difference between an Angus and a cross. 50% were kind of all over the place. They were almost beef conformity, but also had dairy traits. And then the lower 25% still look like dairy. That's what they concluded. And we went away thinking, okay, there's got to be some improvement on sire selection, and there is. And there's more and more data coming out. Like I said, Simmental is updating their sire recommendations, I believe, on a bi-weekly basis. You talk to any of the sire companies, and they're improving every few weeks. They're updating the recommendations to dairymen for the crosses based on the probability of their progeny looking more and more and finishing more and more like beef. However, in 2020, I'll just give you one little snapshot. I was doing some technical assistance with a farm, and I was working with a dairy, and we were working through different things. They were trying to bring some family and get them involved, diversify into maple and some other things. And the guy brought in a check, and it was a negative $9.78 check that he just got for his calves. Can you imagine that, getting a negative $9 check from the bank? He goes, what do you do with a negative check? And basically, whether it is the animal that sold did not cover the shipping, and so the shipping was greater than the cost of the animal, which, he was getting $50 to $60 probably for that animal. And it was a sign to me that there's all this potential for improvement in beef on dairy, and yet producers are getting paid squat for their calves. Serious discounts, depressed feeder prices, and this is back in 2020, 2021 when we were doing our readiness survey, and we saw like producers need a guaranteed check for their calves. And so we said, well, what if we launch a program, do a pilot study, and that's what we've done. Here we are. We've successfully raised and finished over 100 animals. We've paid producers a good wage for 2023 calves. And we've seen over the course of 3 years, those prices radically change. We've tracked the market. We have cost data. And I want to spend some time now transferring over to the results of the work. To begin with, some definitions and constructs. You saw in our report that we've tried to center on the most salient data points. ADG, translated as average daily gain. That was essential for us to get the true costs of per pound gain during various intervals, and you'll see that in the write-up. The economics involved in production require you to weigh animals fairly regularly to track those costs and know when and where you're making money. So average daily gain was essential to figure that over time and days. It's basically the weight gained over a period of time. Cost of gain is the cost to put on those pounds based on that gain rate and the true costs absorbed by the operation. We also saw quickly emerge the need to develop some metrics on why someone would hold animals past day to week old or past 6 months. So we developed our best effort for a construct is the earned value of the gain. In other words, if I hold this animal past 6 months and take it out to finish at current prices, how much do I stand to gain in profit? And so you'll see those figures in our data. We also figured transaction costs for some of the market channels that require further downstream value adds. Transaction costs include, costs back to the producer for distribution, for shipping, for packaging, and the like. And so then that requires us to develop another construct of net pricing, or net pay price, you might say, for beef when you're selling downstream in the value chain. Does anybody have any questions about those definitions or constructs? We'd like to move on into results, but before we do that, I want to make sure those constructs are clear. If anybody has any questions,
Kevin, I have a question.
Yes.
Related to your previous comment about having to pay for the shipping for the animals. I know that the paradigm has shifted quite a bit since that time, and folks seem to be getting paid much better for their beef today. Has that affected your program at all, and those that may be interested in doing something like the beef on dairy?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, it will, and it has. And I think, Allison, I appreciate the question. We're going to dive into some of that earned value of gain change over time. I want to get to some of that data, and let's dial in that question when we get there.
Perfect.
There's a table
Okay.
for that. Yep.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yeah. And it has changed. Some of the results, do we have a slideshow? Elizabeth, do you have that slideshow? I feel like I'm running without it.
Yeah.
Am I launching it, or are you launching it?
You can launch it, and then if
Okay.
if it doesn't work for you, then I have it.
Okay.
But I think it'd be easier for you to be able to control it.
All right.
If you hit share,
Yeah.
the
If you bring it up on your screen, and then the top right has a share button once it's up, and you can choose the screen you want to share.
Okay.
Sometimes it can be difficult to see hands when you are sharing, so I'm happy to let you know when folks have a question, or you can pause when you want to take questions.
Okay. Let's see if it works. All right.
It's coming up.
it's coming.
Right.
There we go.
Hey,
Excellent.
great. Okay. All right. Well, it's not really what I wanted here. Try this. Not sure what all is, well, it's going to show the notes, it looks like. I apologize. I can't figure that out, but let's roll. All right.
We're
some of
actually
the,
We're
not
not
seeing
seeing your
them
notes.
on our end, so you're good.
oh, you're not seeing notes.
in-
Okay.
No,
Okay. Hey, this is
So
friendly.
you're-
All right.
there you
Cool.
go.
All right. Okay. So let's go to the first slide. This captures the data on the weight difference, and we can see the blue is Wagyu and the orange is Angus. So from the very beginning, the birth weights are higher, the feeder weights, the weaning weights, the feeder weights, all the way through. The Angus breed, this is no surprise, is growing faster than the Wagyu crosses. There's no surprise there. There's a breed difference that flattens out a little bit after yearling stage. So yearling stage to finish, the spread does not increase, but it flattens out after yearling stage. We also saw that the cost of gain for different intervals changed dramatically. The cost of gain during weaning stage was the highest. It dropped dramatically to the lowest cost of gain from weaner to feeder stage. Then it slowly rose during the feeder to yearling stage, and then it rose yet again, trying to finish the animal over that last year.
And what's the age of finishing? It's 1 year. Is that what you were?
No,
Sorry.
it's closer to 2 years. Yeah, it's 22 months, I think, was our average. 22 to 23 months. Yeah. So as you can see, it starts to raise some questions about profitability. Like, well, can you even afford to wean an animal? Well, once they're weaned, they grow pretty cheap. Do you ever gain that back, those losses? It started to raise these questions.
And this is based on today's prices, Kevin?
This is our average. No, not today's prices. These are we use 23 and 25 data. We'll get to
Okay.
some of the spread, and this is these are just costs. These are the costs actual costs absorbed from 23 to 25. Once those calves hit the ground, we track the costs, and those costs are real. They were real from 23 to 24 to 25. Those are what's here. They are real, but they were tied to the 100 animals that we raised and finished. So it is past, but you would expect only incremental increases there for feed and boarding. It would not be substantial. It would just track up perhaps a tad. But we finished them in 25, so we're not too far away. cost, not revenue. Revenue, different story. That's changed a lot. So gain rates, breed difference, cost rates. You can see here that the Angus not only gain faster, but they cost less, which makes sense, right? So you start to look downstream. Is there a market to reward you to make up that difference? Let me just speak quickly to the feed difference. We were asked to look at grass-fed and organic. We tried to get a representative number of the 100 animals based on market demand. We ended up with 3 organic animals. We were not able to grass feed and finish all those animals, but we did have a group that we were able to put them on pasture during pasture season and background them while we fed them concentrates. They're not purely grass fed. We didn't see any substantial difference putting them on pasture in their gain rates to the ones that stayed in the barn the whole time. But the organic costs were 25 to 30% higher at every stage. And we were not able to find a market that would reward that difference. Now, is there one? Maybe. For direct sales, possibly. We just weren't able to find it with only 3 animals. We were constrained by our limited time and resources to market. So just quickly, I wanted to speak to the feed difference. We're seeing basically a 25 to 30% increase in organic costs and no reliable commodity market that would cover that difference in the organics. Now, selling direct relationship with buyers, maybe. We just don't know of it, and it's not a safe fallback. It's not a part of our recommendation at this point. Pay price over time. This is what you're kind of getting at, I think, Allison, is how did things change over time? Let's look at this. The pay price for our Wagyu is in the orange, and the yellow, this is data you've seen already, and the yellow is Angus. And we had a 2-year difference over time. You can see at the top line, just under the header, you see the rise in Wagyu price for the calf from $200 up to $1,069. That's an $869 difference in the pay price to the producer for their calf, their day to week old, 435% increase. Then you see on the Angus, yet another increase. Now we got a $1,038 increase in price of the base cost. This is your basis in the calf. It went up 519% in a 2-year period. This is the most dramatic and historic thing we saw during our time of this study. But you go down and you start to see, okay, how did the market adjust for those later stage intervals? The weaned animals went up 66% for Wagyu and 76% for Angus. Then it drops off. You went down, it went up 35% for the feeder stage, which is like the 5 weights for the Wagyu, and 38% for the feeder stage 5 weights for Angus. And so we saw that this is something we really need to track. We really need to track these market prices, these pay prices, because it dramatically affects if you can cover your basis in the calf, if you hold that calf and don't sell it at day to week old. The final line is the overall pay price, birth to finish. And we saw only a 12% increase in the Wagyu over time and a 28% increase in the Angus. Basically what we saw is parity happen. There's no more premiums for these Wagyu animals. Nobody's offering it, and they just need pounds. That's what we saw happen. So yeah, go ahead, Jake.
Yeah, I think, Kevin, this is a really important piece to understand fully. So could you describe, how these pay price changes impact the, the program that was being developed, and then how it also now just impacts dairy producers who either are interested in beef on dairy or have calves to sell. So I think that's an important piece, is like those two
Sure.
dynamics. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, with the whole model we had built was based on the $200 calf. And so the basis increasing between 400 and 500% knocked us out. We didn't have the capital for that. We were doing things concurrent to the project where we were starting animals and raising them and doing some different things. But our ability to purchase calves from dairymen at day to week old was essentially annihilated by these increases. We just ran out of the capital required to purchase. Now, dairymen, it's different for dairymen. Their cost to produce those calves didn't change. All of a sudden, they're just getting really rewarded for these day-to-week-old calves in ways that they never have been before. And so for a dairyman, they have to contemplate it from their basis is different than what our model was. And they have to contemplate, is there additional money to be made if I hold this animal past weaning stage and carry it on into feeder stage? That's the contemplation. And so some of the tools we've developed are largely around that they keep an eye on the market and make sell, hold decisions based on the market prices. Is that clear?
And just one other thing, could you just mention a little context of what's driving that increase in calf price? Like, I think that's another important thing to understand, of like the general cattle markets.
I mean, it's market fundamentals of supply and demand. Demand is up, has been up consistently for beef at the shelf, at the groceries and and yet supply is historically low. Drought conditions, decreased imports of feeders from Mexico due to screwworm. Those are probably the biggest factors externally. Internally, when you look at average age of beef producers, ranchers, they're aging out too. So it was an opportunity for them to get out amid supply, low supply. Raj, what are you seeing? Yeah, I think you're muted as well. You might be muted.
Sorry, no, I think you've pretty much covered it, Kevin. That's
okay.
It's yeah, go ahead.
So it's a supply issue, and I think finally dairymen are getting paid probably what they should have been getting paid all along for their calves. Certainly as the pay price for beef is going up. It's probably a little inflated. It feels a little bubbly right now. I suspect it may go down, or they'll continue to close plants and just harvest less beef, and shelf price will keep going up until demand settles down. I suspect that is what will happen eventually. So what we started to think, okay, well, how much money can you earn at different intervals? Okay, so we know your cost basis has gone up. How much money is there to be earned in gross profit? Now, we've disregarded overheads. This is just straight direct costs of boarding and feed. And in that, we've got a table here that shows Wagyu versus Angus. In 23, there was a $47 difference if you're selling weanlings. For pay price, there's a $94 difference for feeders. But there's still gross profit at every stage in 23 figures. Now you switch to 25. Now you're seeing losses at the weaning stage. To pay that base price and wean those animals, anybody buying calves is losing money during that period. All right, they've lost $141 on every Wagyu calf, and they've lost $106 on every Angus calf they've started if they bought them at market prices. Okay. Now they gain back $284 and $294 at feeder stage, but for somebody in this business, that may not be worth it. That's a lot of capital outlay, and if you're buying, it may not be worth it. If a dairyman is foregoing a pay price of $1,238 for an Angus calf and saying, I'm going to wait, I'm going to wean it and get it to feeder stage, now they can make the extra $300. You see? They can make that extra money and still cover their basis. Their
It's
opportunity
not the
cost is
extra
covered.
681 for the Angus. They
Well,
could
that'd
make
be
us,
yearling stage. That's carrying it out to yearling stage. Yes.
okay, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, you're saying weaning to feeder. Okay.
Yeah, yes, but you're right. The feed them out to yearling. Now and we think that that's probably the nexus, Elizabeth, right there, somewhere between feeder and yearling stage. Uh, it looks like somewhere between feeder and yearling stage is the optimal hold time current in 25 pricing. Now I have 25 pricing in there. We could, with the tool, you can update it to 26 pretty easy, but it goes down obviously after that. 681 dropping off to 174. You know, for holding an animal, you get paid $174 for holding that animal yet almost another year. You know, not worth it. Too much risk. You could lose that animal. How many do you lose? And you only gain $173 by holding them. So we think the most optimal opportunity is somewhere between feeder and yearling.
Oh, and what accounts for that loss
Uh,
between yearling and finish?
Well, it all is fed through with the gain rates we had calculated, and the cost of that pound of gain.
Okay.
And the cost of the gain goes up substantially after yearling stage. There was a graph earlier that showed that cost rising, cost of gain as they get older, and that's absorbing any, profits, because the pay price is not tracking as high or as fast at a rate of increase at the finish stage. That's where the finishers are not, now they're starting to go up. 26, it's hitting, right? So we're seeing choice prices above $4. Never seen this before. So if I put in 26 numbers, it would change.
And Kevin, I see Donna has a question, and then I'm just thinking,
Yeah.
regarding time, I think
Yep.
for like the deep dive on the data, that's very, like, this is all the stuff that's like super important for farmers to understand. The workshops are going to be focused on it, the
Yep.
webinar. But do you want to shift? And I'm not like, we don't have to do it, immediately. I think let's take Donna's question, but to some of the more landscape
Yeah. We'll fly.
level analysis around needs that might guide the
Sure.
boards, just future thinking about supporting this work. And I did
Absolutely.
invite board members, if this data is like, if you want to dive into it again, like, please, again, attend an event, attend the webinar, which is going to be
Okay.
very focused on helping farmers understand how to use this data to improve their practices. But
Donna, what's your question? Thanks, Elizabeth. Yes, I'll fast forward.
Just real quick, I was looking at the stages. What is feeder? I don't understand what
Feeder.
you mean.
That's a 6-month-old animal, roughly about 500 to 600 pounds. Yeah, it's animal ready to be going on pasture, fully transitioned. Yep. So the concept became earned value of gain. That's something we'll explore in these workshops, as you mentioned. It basically informs a hold or sell decision. Can you earn enough money to justify holding those animals? We have some tables worked up here that show what the earned value of gain is at different stages by pound and by head. So these are useful metrics for any producer thinking through whether or not they're holding or selling animals, whether calf stage, feeder stage, yearling, or finish. And we can dive into some of that down the road. But clearly, there's money to be made. You just have to keep your eye on the ball with marketing and what the markets are paying for various stages. This is the tool we developed. We'll dive into some of that, like I said, in the workshops. And this basically allows an independent producer to put in their actual numbers. We started the tool with our numbers, but it gives them ability to look at their cost per ton of concentrate, cost per ton of forage. They can plug all that in and customize this. And in the green, you'll have numbers that would justify holding the animal to finish. In the red, animals need to be culled out if they aren't hitting target weights based on certain market prices. So it allows you to manage, use it as a decision-making tool to manage your own group of beef on dairy animals if you're holding them on your farm, or an aggregator could use it to determine what their pay price could be, or whether or not they're holding or selling feeders or carrying them on. I'll move on. Market channels and transaction costs. There's two markets. I hope it's clear in the writing: live cattle or beef, and then within that, you're either selling direct or you're selling wholesale as a commodity. The cost transaction costs had to be figured based on how those animals are typically sold. So live wholesale fats, the fat animals we sold had a average of hanging weight of 1,400 pounds. The pay price on average during that period of time was $215. The transaction cost is shrink, basically the buyer charging you a percentage of the weight that's being shipped as a deduct off your pay price. And that's when you're selling live. Gross revenue per head, 3,000. That's the lowest. And if you take those animals, process them, and cut them into retail cuts, and in addition, ship those to the porch next day in a box, frozen, the highest yield is available there. We did that, $3,919 you're able to hold on to after you sell the animal. It takes about 30 transactions to sell an animal that way. So higher transaction costs, more shipping, more packaging, more people, more marketing costs. All those things are figured in the transaction cost per head. Costs about $5,000, $5,500 to market an animal that way. But there's higher percentage or higher revenue yield as well. That was interesting to just explore all these different market channels and where the money's to be made. We would recommend pursuing white label. That's the second one. There's virtually no transaction costs. It's our beef, your label, and you come buy it at the barn. That's probably been the most optimal, although it's challenging on scaling that. And then the final would be pursuing these online sales. People, that's where the market's at for custom beef. They want it to the door next day. They want to push a button they want to toggle through and purchase online and have it shipped the next day. Before we get into discussion, any other questions you might have now to help clarify before we move on? I can take a few questions here and then we'll dive right in. We've got maybe 15 minutes for discussion, or maybe
Gavin,
what do we have for discussion?
I don't
Sorry.
have a question. I just want to say for this project and being able to watch it from, inception to the data that you just put forward, I think it is impressive that, especially noting how the market was when this project first started out compared to today and what folks are getting paid for beef, that you've continued the project, because I don't think anybody could have predicted where beef prices were going to go today for those 2-day-old calves. So I just commend you for, following through and putting together the data and actually having that table that is a tool for people to use. I think it's very impressive that there was no discouragement. Maybe you were discouraged at certain points, but you certainly seem, pretty positive throughout the whole time. So just thank you for putting it all together and having the resources for the industry.
Appreciate that. Thank you very much, Allison. It
Thank
took some commitment from, I wouldn't have done it without my partners and support from Jake and others along the way. So thank you
Yeah,
for saying
nicely.
that.
Good job.
So on the production side, I'll just quickly discuss some of these things and maybe let Roger take off on this. On the production, we saw it's critical to add value to your calves. That can be done genetically or through health value adds through vaccination, parent verification, and other things. It's also critical to aggregate to lower your costs. I'll just start off with those 2 points, and then Raj, maybe you can share some of your thoughts about how aggregation and some of these value adds through health and such help producers lock in a plan for their production.
Yeah, well, I could get on my philosophical soapbox about the whole thing because I'm really passionate about the whole. What I'd get back to is keeping all those cattle, all that beef on dairy, and doing a better job of everything we're doing here in Vermont and working together as a cooperative to put together a consistent beef supply. And just to what we could do just in Vermont, my numbers may not be perfectly accurate, but if there's 30,000 open dairy gestations that could be available for beef, and we only got 10,000 of those, as far as acreage wise, it's going to take between 1 and 5 acres per head of per head of animals, depending on the quality and how much grazing, how much feeding. So there's 10 to 50,000 acres that could be conserved in Vermont to do our beef on dairy projects. And that's just for 1 year. All those animals have to stay for 2 years. So you double that. And if we were to help the producers put in place health and disease prevention protocols, we also could hit animal welfare premiums. There's the Beef Improvement Federation. There's premiums throughout the whole thing, but people have to have access to that information. Of all the dairy producers, beef producers that I see, there's so much that's just done the way they've always done it, and they don't even realize that there's a bigger market than just sending to the local auction. We could probably double the price of what most producers could get if we could consolidate into full truckloads, decrease transportation costs, and all of these things eventually have a very positive environmental impact. We keep the animals, we improve our feed efficiencies, we produce less feed, less fertilizer, less waste, more efficiencies on the animals, and then make, at the end of the day, if we can also do that and hit finished weights and carcass premiums where all these people can be more profitable, all three of those, or all of that together, profits really what's going to keep the animals here. We're gonna conserve land. We're gonna have this state and our population happier the more environmentally friendly we are. To me, it just goes on and on and on, and we're just sort of putting things on paper that people haven't had available to them in the past. And like my skill set is tapped out at getting the animals to the processing plant, but if there was help to get those animals marketed to the population we have available, the sky's the limit. We could be the Northeast could be the major beef producers of the entire country. And I know we don't have much time, but I could go on and on and on. And I'm good at the philosophies, and Kevin's been fabulous about putting it on paper because I'm not very good at that.
Thanks, Raj. Hey, and for the sake of time, does everybody have a hard stop at 10:15, or can we extend to 10:20?
I think we're good till 10:20. We have another
10:20?
presentation going
Okay.
on, so they'll be joining us momentarily.
Okay. All right. Let me fast forward a little bit. I'll just mention on production, there is a livestock risk protection program out there. USDA has. It sets a floor price. You're allowed to purchase different amounts of policy premium. People need some training on that. But it's essential for a hedge, in my opinion, for anybody wanting to hold large numbers of animals. There's also, we're going to strongly recommend handling systems for beef animals. That means tubs, alleys, chutes, and weights, scales. Those things have to be part of your program, and we had those as part of ours. We're getting birth weights on the calf scale, we're getting weaning weights on platform scales, and then we're doing the things of alley scales and chutes to get these animals weighed regularly, so we have good data on gains. And we're just going to recommend that for anybody. You need good data, especially during winter months, to know if you should be doing this or not, if you have the right conditions in your barn for winter month growing. We saw quite a drastic difference depending on conditions there. Marketing, We mentioned the hold sell tool. We're going to use that. We also think it's critical that you define what markets you're going to be a part of. If you're going to be part of the cattle market or the beef market, and why. And the scale of involvement you've got, we can't stress enough. If you're in the cattle business, you've got to be putting together 50,000 pound loads of cattle, whether they be feeders or finished fat animals. As soon as you sell or ship partial loads, the costs rise significantly and your margin gets eaten into. What we've presented and will present are full load pricing for live cattle. And we think it's essential to be competitive for Vermont farmers to aggregate and produce 50,000 pound loads. That's either that's 32 to 33 finished animals or, 60 or so feeders, right? 60, 65 feeders,
Yep.
typically sometimes 70, depending on the weights. All right.
And nobody's doing that, Kevin, currently? Nobody's aggregating?
Well,
Just to
what they're
clarify.
doing, they're using a lot of what we see is folks using goosenecks and then aggregating, presumably in New York State. The aggregation's happening out of our state, but they're going around with the goosenecks and pulling them out that way. They're going to the sale barns, they're going to individual farms, they're pulling them out in small goosenecks, but then they're aggregating pretty quickly, just 100 or 200 miles out. Yeah, most likely. Yeah. We visited part of our job was to visit a aggregation facility in the Midwest where they aggregate, I think it's 3,000 day old calves a week, and it's substantial to watch and see how they do that. And there is an Amish community that does it. There's 4 brothers that aggregate, and then they build, facilities behind people's houses and let them raise 220 animals in a lot, and then they move them into hoop barns. They got a series of hoop barns. It's phenomenal to see the system they built. But we're seeing okay, that's the competition. They're going around to Michigan, Indiana, and Ohio dairies. They have truckers going constantly bringing in calves, 3,000 a week. But that's the kind of competition we're up against in the aggregate. So we have to be thoughtful of how we're trying to market into similar competitive markets if we don't have those efficiencies. Value. Let's talk just a little bit about value and then move on to recommendations. Value, I just want to stress that any commodity sales of finished beef are going to be sold probably and subject to grade, whether directly or indirectly. Grade requires yield grade and quality grade, deducts and premiums. And we just got to be thoughtful of how that works for commodities and train people on how that works. In our study, just for example, we had average yield of 62%. So a live weight to a hanging weight was only 62%, 62.35. That's a little lower than a typical. Average grading choice or above was 96.5%. So our feed program and our genetics are working. They're getting choice or above by the time they're finished, 96.5%. That's a phenomenal rate. Average deducts, though, for yield grade on each load, we were losing almost $203. Around 203 on average, we'd lose $200 per load for yield. Now, there's a grading system for yield grade. You're welcome to look it up. We're taking deducts there, but we're getting premiums for quality. That's animals that are grading prime or above, and we're getting $703 on average. So we're netting about $500 on and above choice price with the feed program and the genetics we're using, primarily Wagyu on those animals. Some recommendations. We want to recommend incentives to hold and to aggregate. Incentives could be like a rebate system for any farmers, any dairy farmers that don't ship their animals to the sale barn or ship them out of state immediately. And we're thinking some sort of rebate. They got to have some cash in their pocket. There's an EID system that you could easily integrate so that those animals go into an aggregated facility in Vermont and being raised to weaning, you could identify what farm they came from, and those rebates could be issued. Some sort of incentive, and an incentive to the aggregator who's willing to hold those calves, bottle feed them up to weaning stage as a service to individual dairy farms or as a independent entrepreneurial, custom feeding operation. The incentives to hold these animals in Vermont and to aggregate need to be present. If they're not, you're not going to probably get private enterprise to invest. Subsidy for financing the improvements needed. We think handling facilities and scales on each farm are critical. Tagging for traceability. These animals got to be traced if they're part of a program. It's easy to do with EIDs. Again, and then infrastructure to house and feed bottle calves. In the write-up, we have a concept barn. Holman Lau put that together, and they have a plug and play auto feeder system for calves. The concept barn would feed and wean up to probably 1,000 animals a year. Each of those, if you had hubs where there were 4 hubs in Vermont where you had, capacity for raising, let's go with Roger's numbers, somewhere between 10 and 20,000 animals a year that you could start in the 4 regions. We're talking maybe Franklin County, Addison County, Orange County, and maybe Caledonia. That all is negotiable. But if you had hubs where you could send your calves, there would need to be some subsidy to finance those the working capital required, as well as the capital outlay for the infrastructure. We have some quotes, general quotes for those facilities. They hover around, let's call it 750,000 for an install on one of those that would produce 1,000 weanlings in a year. These kind of subsidy for financing these improvements would be essential to get folks involved. There's a 3 to 5 year payback period on those. We also think it's critical to finance some improvements on marketing, storage, and distribution if there's going to be co-branded products into the major metro areas. We ran into the cost working capital requirements of up to $100 per new customer, and it's just an untenable. We didn't have that kind of money to do that independently or with grant money, so we decided we've learned it. But the sophistication, as you guys are all experiencing in online sales, getting attention of customers and new customers and keeping those folks and reducing attrition is it costs an incredible amount of money to do that, to play in that game. There's money to be made, but it costs a lot. So we would recommend some subsidy for financing that from a working capital standpoint. Third recommendation would be funding research and development. If you come to some of the seminars, the webinar, or the on-farm, we'll talk more about the research and development on sire selection for feed efficiency. Roger mentioned some of that. And, we think it's really critical to offer trainings and technical assistance, more of it. For farmers leaning in to the opportunity. We know that there are several folks wanting to get into this. They know they're leaving money on the table if they're getting paid X and somebody else is making Y. Why should they be shipping? I think they're going to learn real quick that holding feeders makes some sense for some of the farms to make more profit. A few concluding statements and then open it up for Q&A. I ran out like a scenario of the economic impact if you had some calf raising facilities. Estimated 4 hubs of 4 calf raising facilities, the cost would be about 10 million. You'd be producing up to 40,000 calves annually, just using the lower 30% of the milking herd, bred to beef and aggregated. If 50% were sold as feeders and 50% were actually finished for markets, there'd be an additional $120 million in Vermont revenues to producers on an annual basis. There'd be an additional, let's call it 30% back to vendors and suppliers. 70% back to vendors and suppliers. Let's call it another 90 to 100 million would be going to those vendors and suppliers to produce those revenues. And then, our first and closing statement would be, right out of the gate, if there's additional funding available, it would be for these prototypes, maybe in Addison and Franklin County, where you have calf raising facilities that are able to be used as a service to farmers to get those calves off the farm, get them raised to weaning stage, and then aggregated for future markets. And that's it. I'm closing out. I'm sorry to take so much time. It's been a pleasure. I really appreciate your patience. Yeah.
Thank you to you both. Definitely strike a lot of questions in my mind. Appreciate the data that you've given us. It's an overhaul for sure. Good. And we have your email. So if there's any burning questions, knowing we're running late on time, feel free to reach out to Kevin or Roger. And thank you very much again. So we're going to dismiss you from your project of presenting today. Have a great day. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Hope to see you all. Thanks for your
bet.
time.
Take care.
All
Be
right,
well.
thank
Bye.
you. Yep, bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Wow. It was excellent. I'm sure Jake and Ellen have seen a lot of that, but that was very new to me. So thank you. Good partnership you have going on there. We're going to transition to the MLOFT conversation, correct, Elizabeth?
Yeah.
Okay.
Just a quick question, Allison, sorry.
Sure. Yeah.
I just want to make sure we get notifications of the webinar and the workshops when they come out, because I definitely know people that would be very interested in that.
Excellent. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
They're also in the packet, Alan. I
Okay.
shared the link to register. And maybe I'll send out a separate email following this, because now it will be fresh on people's mind. And if you could, it would be really helpful if people could promote those events with, dairy or, beef producers that you think would be interested, because they're only going to be as valuable as the number of farmers that attend. So
And I was thinking too, the conservation districts should all know. I think that would be a good outlet.
yeah, we've let the conservation districts know, and the watershed alliances. But let them know again, especially if you have a personal relationship. This is how we find outreach has to go. You really have to plug an event because there's too much going on.
Mhm.
So yeah, the more, the merrier.
Excellent. So we're going to transition over to MLOF, noting that our next guests come in at 10:40, and I understand Oliver is on and has been a great part of this conversation. Oliver, would you like to give a quick overview, and then we'll go from there with the ask? You're on mute. Why are you still on mute? There we go.
How about that? Does the sound
Excellent.
okay?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
All right, MLOFT. I'll start just by saying thanks to the support from WLEB for this concept. I think going back to almost the beginning, there's the opportunity to look at if there was a way for WLEB to support Vermont students to participate in the mechanized logging and freight trucking or forestry trucking professional development course that's hosted by our partners in Maine, the professional logging contractors of the Northeast. Typically, Maine has obtained some congressionally directed spending to support the tuition costs for MLOF, which are around $32,000. And so our thinking was we could use WLEB funds to provide a stipend to students who are receiving the tuition assistance from the CDS funds. And I think it's around a 4 to 6 month course. And the stipend for living costs, room and board, et cetera, was estimated at about $10,000. So originally the thinking was we would use WLEB costs to support the living stipend for 3 Vermonters who went through the application process, and the cost of WLEB would be about $30,000. We worked with professional logging contractors of the Northeast to set that up, and that evolved into I believe, and Elizabeth can correct me if I'm wrong, a grant agreement between WLEB and PLC, which would cover not only the stipend, but some additional costs around doing some marketing and outreach to Vermonters to make them aware of this opportunity, because without any applications, this doesn't really get too far. And so there was an agreement with PLC signed for a larger amount, and that covered the cost of doing that outreach and marketing and some admin costs that PLC for work that PLC did on our behalf. But ultimately, that process led to, I think, around 6 applications from Vermont-based students for the MLOF training course, and the top 3 were selected. And there was some up and down in that process, but we got to a point where things looked good. And then I think that the sort of the roadblock that we ran into recently was that the congressionally directed spending funds, which covered tuition, were being held up by the Department of Education under, sort of Trump administration delays around, providing that funding to states. And so the information we received back from MLOFT via PLC was there's no funding available for the tuition. Maine was going ahead with using state revenue to cover tuition costs for Maine applicants, but that funding could not be made available to out-of-state applicants. And there was even a point where it didn't seem like there would be any room for out-of-state applicants. We did, ask again, couldn't you find room for out-of-state applicants if we could figure out some way to cover all the tuition costs? And, that led to a positive response where we were told that there could be up to three spots for out-of-state applicants, but you're looking at covering the entire tuition cost, which is, again, is $32,500 plus additional funding for that stipend to cover room and board during the training, which was estimated at around $10,000 per student. So you're looking at a cost now of around $42K per student. And that led to some decision making from some input from both the forestry committee and the coordinating committee in the past couple of weeks. But I think last week the coordinating committee took a decision that we really should try to support these Vermont-based applicants. Workforce development and is a real challenge in the forest products industry, in the logging sector. We have some Vermont-based students who, at least recently, have gone through the application process and wanted to continue to participate. And so let's see if we could use WLEB funds to cover some or all of the tuition costs. And I think that led to a coordinating committee decision, which would need to be reviewed by the full board today, of course, to use WLEB costs to cover the full tuition for up to 3 students, and then seek additional funding, perhaps via a low interest loan from a partner to cover that, to the students to cover that tuition. That then, to sort of, as part of bringing this to the board today, we also reached back out to the 3 Vermont students who had applied. Turns out they had been accepted, and it turns out that only 2 of them are still available to take the MLOF course. The 3rd student who had been accepted from Vermont had made other plans in the wake of some earlier information that it wasn't going to work out. And so, I think I might hand it over to Allison or Elizabeth to get into the specifics of what the board is being asked to review this morning. But I think essentially the ask is that the board approve using WLEB funds to pay for the $32,500 tuition for 2 Vermont-based students to MLOFT. And as it is only 2, Allison and Elizabeth, I don't know if there was a decision made. Would we then support those students to seek some sort of low interest loan for their living costs during the course? Or as it is only 2, would we also extend the WLEB funding to cover the additional $10K for living costs? And,
Sure.
and apologies if I missed that in a
No, you
recent
did
email.
good. You did good. So you're absolutely right. The living costs, we've had conversations with both Vita and Farm Credit East to see if they would be interested in providing loans to these students. And Farm Credit East has been engaged and seems as though they're willing. We did confirm, I think Dana had a conversation with David Lane at Farm Credit this week to let him know who the 2 students are. Vita is not under statute allowed to do such loans, so I think it's good that we at least learned that through the process as well. And the $32,500 for the 2 students, it would be $9,500 would come from this budget because we have carry forward, which means that we would need the remainder to come from the FY27. So I I mean, we were originally asked, the coordinating committee, to approve for one student. The students were ranked. And I think, there was a conversation about the fact that if you have, 3 students, how do you choose one? Knowing that there was a ranking, and if we have 3 students that are interested in, this work and keeping our working lands operating, perhaps, we should be investing in those students. So we thought that it would be appropriate to bring it to the full board and see if there would be support for the tuition-based, not the room and board. The room and board, the students would be figuring out on their own. So the total ask Elizabeth has put in the chat. So we would be open for discussion, and if this is something the board would like to do, we would need a motion and a second to carry it forward today on a vote. So happy to take questions. And again, I think it's important to know this is very last minute because we thought that we had federal funding for this. So it came up very fast because the federal funding wasn't there. And for the main students, they're paying for it out of their main general fund budget, and we don't have that ability to do.
This is Alan, so moved, and great work, everybody behind the scenes. I know there's a lot of changes several different times, and this is a great opportunity, I think, for WLEB.
Thank you, Alan. Do we have a second to get it up for discussion?
This is Alicia, and I'd be happy to second it.
Thank you, Alicia. I really want to say thank you to those who brought this, to the coordinating committee, knowing that it was late in line. I look at our youth today and I think it's exciting when our youngsters want to get involved in anything that's going to keep our working lands open. So I appreciate it. I think that, going forward, if this is something that is successful, we probably should have a conversation, Oliver, and I think Catherine's on too, as to whether this is something we should be asking for in the future of the legislature if they want to support it. But this gives us the groundwork to at least do the ask. Are there any questions or comments before we take a vote? Obviously, we'll be reporting back to the board. And we can even probably talk to these students in the end and get a presentation, I would imagine too. Oliver, you have a question?
Yeah, and Alton, thanks for the support of the coordinating committee. I think the forestry committee definitely supports this approach. Our recommendation had been sort of thinking more modestly to use WLEB funds to support at least one student, and recognizing that our appropriation is only so large. But if there's broader support for multiple students, we're certainly on board, at least on behalf of FPR. I would want to sort of raise the question, if we took some funding out of the FY26, but more importantly, we're taking $35K of additional funds out of, I believe it's the service provider grant pool for FY27. And Elizabeth, correct me if I'm wrong there. It would be good for the board to have an understanding of, are those funds just coming off the top and then we make all of our grant awards in that category based on that reduced amount, or are those funds counting against forestry awards, which would then reduce the pot for forestry awards? And I think that's a good discussion for us to have clarity on, so that we don't run into that in 3 to 6 months where we have different perspectives, and some people thinking, hey, that came off the top, or so they're thinking, hey, forestry already got an additional $35K for MLOF, so that should reduce their share of the whatever grant fund. I think it's, again, service provider that these funds are coming out of. So I'll stop there.
That's a good point. Because originally, I hadn't even really thought of that. I thought it was coming off the top, and then we would still have the 60-40 split when we remained on decision making. So I think it's important that we all have a grand understanding of how we wish to do that in the long haul. So Liz, and then Donna.
Yeah, this is just a personal comment, just as someone who, I work at Sterling College, and, watching these small institutions that are really involved with stewarding our landscape, I think this is money put to good use, and it seems like a powerful use of our expertise.
Thank you for that. And thank you for what you do. No, absolutely. We're changing lives. Donna?
It's interesting. I hadn't really thought about which pot the money was coming out of. So is this considered service provider or is this like a business enhancement because it's servicing two specific businesses? And
So
as far as the ag versus forestry, I don't think it comes out of one pot or the other because we don't typically make our decisions on we have to give a certain percent to, one type of business.
Mhm.
yeah, so I think my proposal would be we would still do a 60-40 split and this would come off the top, this 25,500. And I agree with Donna. We don't have a fixed percentage between forestry and ag service provision. But I think, of course, we would know, we would all be aware that when the conversation comes up, that these additional funds had, gone to MLOFT, even though it's, as we said, coming off the top. So the 25,500 would come out of the total grant making, but we would still do a 60-40 split between service provision and business enhancement. That's my proposal.
Yeah, I hadn't really thought about it until it was raised. So if others feel, that we should have more of a conversation about that or feel different,
We
than
can
it coming
also-
off the top, we
Mhm.
should have that discussion, and we don't have to have it today, right? We can have
That's what I
it,
was getting at.
yeah.
June is
when the time
where we're
comes.
gonna dive into the budget, so we'll have a proposal, but we can always shift things then.
Yeah, we can certainly spark the reminder of the conversation then. But yeah, we'll.
Great, yeah,
Oliver, do you
that's,
have more to add?
yeah, no, that sounds good to me. I just wanted to be transparent and raise it, but I have no problem with voting on the motion, and worrying about the so-called split later on. So either is fine. And once again, I appreciate all the work that was done, the board members' support to make this happen.
Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments before we take a vote? And thank you for making the motion so quick and second on such a last minute topic.
I just want to flag for folks that, Dana is still in discussion with Farm Credit East, so there is still a potential that if one of these students cannot work out this housing, this request would be reduced, right?
Right.
So
Yeah. We're just
Just to
approving
flag
up
that.
to the two students. Yeah.
exactly, yeah.
Good, good. Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Hi.
Opposed, nay? Thank you. The motion carries. And I think we're pretty close to on time. That's amazing knowing that we were so far behind. And our next guests are with us, correct? We have both Erica and Aisha.
They're here, yeah.
Okay, so this is good. Thank you for joining on time. And I think what we'll do is we'll turn it over to InCommon. Your presentation was in your packet, and then also feel free to share on the screen too if that works for you.
Thanks, Allison.
Mhm.
Yes, so hello, everyone. We have about an hour, maybe a little more, to go through some of our highest impact recommendations today. We're going to be going through 4. And I had made a few changes to the slides, Elizabeth, but I think it's okay. I can remember what I did. I think it makes sense versus me trying to share. So just a quick update on our process. We've been working with you since I think late last summer, and we are designing a public-facing report right now. And we will, I think that I am still discussing with Elizabeth, Claire, and Trevor, but I think I may come to the June meeting for a portion, mainly just to be there in case there are some questions. I know you're going to be talking about the budget, but if there are some specific equity items and actions to discuss, I may attend that, TBD. And we will also be working with the working land staff at the agency on an implementation plan. So today we wanted to discuss 4 of these top strategies. So you can move to the next slide. So the first one was the rollover strategy, if you remember. So there, have been in general frustrations with some businesses applying multiple times. Sometimes they're even fairly competitive. They have good applications, but they're just, not making it to a final award. So we explored a couple of strategies here to create some either rollover opportunities or just giving a little bit of a boost to those or extra consideration to those businesses that do have strong applications in a given year if they apply the next year. Next slide, please. So there, as I mentioned, 2 scenarios here. So the first scenario is that the board, reviewers on the board identify very strong applications, and I think that would still need to be defined. Is that an 85 or above? So that would need to be considered. But that essentially these would be able to just resubmit their application. They'd obviously have to work with agency staff.
Nope, they wouldn't resubmit. That's they would.
Well, they would, right. It would just, that application would be just put into the next year's pool. But there would need to be a conversation like, is this project still relevant? Do you still need the money? So there would need to still be a conversation there, correct, Elizabeth?
No, so they think scenario 1 is actually we would just hopefully as soon as the new fiscal year began in July, beginning in July, basically we would, as soon as possible in the new fiscal year, touch base with the applicants, make sure the project was still, and we did this with the small farm diversification grants and it worked very well. But the reason, so basically strong projects would be identified for rollover. Again, we can decide like what is that metric. And then those applications would be held in web grants, and then it would just be a simple check-in at the beginning of the fiscal year, making any, small changes to the grant agreement. Maybe, costs have changed slightly, and then processing those grant agreements in July and August. So that we would know exactly the remaining pool of funds that are available for the business enhancement grant in the fall. And so that's sort of the most streamlined process for the applicant. There's no resubmission. Any updates that would happen would just happen in the grant agreement itself, if that makes sense. There would be no resubmission of application.
Okay.
That's scenario 1.
Okay. And just so everyone here knows, we worked on these slides collaboratively with Claire and Elizabeth.
Yeah.
So there are some of their input in here. So we're going to we'll be kicking it back and forth and explaining things. Yeah, and I think the way we presented it in the recommendations report was a little bit more like I was suggesting, but I think that this could be a good opportunity. Obviously, some of the pros are, funds can go quickly out to strong projects that have already been vetted. And yeah, and in terms of the grant pool having further limited funds, it may reduce the number of total applications to review in that next year. I also added it could pair very well with this 2-stage process. Actually, sorry, you can just that was more based on the original idea that we had in the recommendation that anyway, so you can ignore that bullet. And then a con would be that the grant, you would have limited funds. So if there were 3 projects identified that would be funded with the next year's funding, then it would just limit the funds there. So I'm wondering, Elizabeth, do we want to go through them all and then go back to discussion, or have discussion in between?
No,
I-
I think maybe looking at both and the pros and cons, and then
Oh, right,
hearing
yeah, yeah,
what
okay,
people,
yeah. So
because
then
I think,
scenario,
yeah.
right, that makes sense, yeah. So scenario 2 is that applicants, this is really the true rollover, applicants that scored, say, 75 or above, to be decided, would basically they could resubmit their previous application and receive bonus points. And those would be automatically applied. So that would just give them a little boost in the next year. And, this really recognizes the fact that people apply multiple times with strong applications, the time and effort they've put in. It could reduce some of that frustration, and also could reduce the number of applicants. And then on the con side, it could be seen as not as transparent, since past applications don't necessarily know how they were scored. And Elizabeth, you put that in there, and I would just love you to explain that one a little bit more.
So I was responding to a comment. What was
No
which
problem.
one?
So the first bullet point on the cons, I think you added that, and I wasn't
Yeah,
100%
so I
sure what you
think,
meant.
okay, I think what I meant by that was just the 5 bonus points is basically acknowledgement that somebody has already put in a lot of time and effort into thinking through this project. They have then, taken feedback into account and resubmitted. So that's the rationale for the 5 bonus
Right,
points,
but in terms
basically.
of the point around applicants don't necessarily know how they scored, I wasn't sure what that meant.
I can clarify that.
I don't know, 'cause I'm not
Thanks,
okay,
Claire.
great, because
Yeah.
I'm not actually saying, yeah.
Do you want me to clarify that? This is Claire.
Yes, please, Claire.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the idea here was that the bonus point would be for past high scoring applicants, not any past applicants. And applicants might not necessarily know if they fall into that pool or not. So that would be something we'd
Okay,
have to
yeah.
figure out how to communicate with them, which is just sort of like another layer of potential confusion and not transparency. The idea was not that it would be any past applicant, but specifically like you applied before and it was a really strong application and we recognize that. And this is a way to give you a boost next time.
Right.
So it wouldn't be
and-
all, it wouldn't be all applications that had, submitted the, previous applications, but high scoring specifically.
Right, which leads to, I mean, if you scored a 70 and didn't get those bonus points, but put a lot of effort into putting a really good application in, you worked with a farm viability provider, all the things, farm and forest viability provider, then you would be at that sort of disadvantage. So
Right.
I think that's a very key point here. Donna, you have a question or a comment?
I guess, can I just say one, okay, Donna, can I say
Oh.
one thing before you ask your question? I just want to say that I think the thinking in, we're now digging into the implementation, right? So Claire and Trevor and I are working with Eric and Aisha to really think about, like, okay, we have these recommendations. What do they look like in, what's the next step of implementation? And I think we've put forth 2 scenarios to get the wheels rolling, but today there could be a scenario 3 or a scenario 3 and 4. Like, I think that's the hope of the conversation. I just wanted to make that clear. Go ahead. Thanks, Donna, for letting me interject.
Yeah, I was getting confused because when I read this, I thought you were allowing the applications to roll over into the applicant pool, but it looks like in the chat that you're saying we would automatically fund them the following year.
In scenario 1, they would
They would
be,
get automatically funded?
so they would basically, you would say, wow, this is a project that we want to award funds to. We don't have any more funds in fiscal year the current fiscal year. So we are tagging this to be awarded with the, and there will always have to be a clause of like, if funds are available. So yeah, that's the proposal in scenario one. So it's like, if there are 2 or 3 projects that the board wants to fund because they're very strong, then they would be funded as soon as the new fiscal year begins. That is the proposal in scenario one. And I would say that like, that's responding a bit to the fact that, we often see applications that the board would like to fund, and it's only a lack of funding that is, causing them to not be funded, that there's not really any significant feedback, right, to the applicant. If there is significant feedback, it wouldn't apply to that kind of a project.
So don't you eventually just run out of money because you keep rolling it over? So finally you get to a year where you've rolled over and used up all your funds and you don't have any, why would people keep applying? It seems
I think
like
it would limit the pool.
dangerous territory.
It would limit the pool, but it would also allow for strong projects to be funded as quickly as possible. I mean, that's this is what we're weighing, right? I think if we go back to scenario one, Aisha, I mean, one of the cons is that the grant pool would have further limited funds, which is a real drawback.
Yeah, I'm curious if anyone else has any suggestions for this. I mean, the goal of this is to, one, address some of the frustration with people applying multiple years, continuing to improve their application, scoring fairly well and still not receiving funds. So that's one issue. And I think we've addressed in another recommendation, we suggested further limiting the amount of people with multiple awards. I don't know if that might help things a little bit, but overall, when people, put a lot of effort in over multiple years, is there any type of extra consideration that they can have? And that's kind of the crux of it. And the mechanics are tricky because I think everything we've thought of so far has a lot of cons as well as pros. So, would love to hear any thoughts at any point if people have suggestions here.
And Elizabeth or Claire, not to put you on the spot, but I think if you have any, top of the mind examples of how many applications you think would actually be rolling over, like what you think the right mix might look like based on your knowledge of what generally scores quite high and what has often been sort of left at the end is here's an application that would have been awarded if not for lack of funds, so that the board might have a sense of would this eat up all of the funding if we were to do this automatic rollover, or is it generally 2 to 3 and it might cut into the funding, but there would still be enough left over for a good grant cycle to take place.
I mean, I think there are a lot of different thresholds that could be used. I think we were thinking of this as the ones that are like those last few that that get cut, the ones that are like in the ones that are deeply discussed in the review meetings, and there was not really a specific reason that they weren't funded. It was more that there were just other things that maybe were higher priorities, and there's really only like a few of those. Like I just was drafting the feedback to applicants that requested it, and I don't know off the top of my head, but I think also like this is up to the board to also decide kind of what that threshold would be. Like it could also be based on, I don't think it would be based on a pure score.
But don't you understand the math? If we have like 8 applications we want to fund and we only have money to fund 5 of them, so we roll 3 over and fund in the next year, then the next year we have 8 applications we want to fund, but we already funded 3, so we're going to fund 2 more and roll over the other 5 to the next year. Well, eventually we get to a year where we can't take any new applications.
Well, I don't think it's that. I think it's
work.
I'm not seeing that. I think the way we're thinking of it is, and again, like I would also say that we're putting out scenarios to generate conversation. I'm not even sure, I feel like a little bit I'm playing like a devil's advocate for a scenario I'm not necessarily behind. But I think Donna, it would be more like right now, let's say we're funding, approximately 18 business enhancement grants, right, per year. So if in fiscal year 26, our current fiscal year, we identified 3, very strong applications that we want to fund, that there really wasn't any good reason not, they're shovel ready. There's no strong feedback as to why they're not being funded other than limited funds. Then in the next fiscal year, you could plan on awarding approximately 15 instead of, depending on the size of the 18. And then, but there wouldn't be like, and I think it would be the similar scenario in that next fiscal year. Does that make sense? Is that helpful?
No, because as you keep rolling over, assuming you have the same number of really good applications every year, you're taking away from the front end of you can no longer fund 18. So now you got 6 that you want to roll over because we couldn't fund all 18. You run out of room for new applications. The math just doesn't
It
work.
limits it. Okay.
Yeah, I think I agree with Donna. I think if we assume level funding year over year, you just enter into a feedback loop where you keep robbing the future fiscal year of funds to, essentially like pre-award 3 applications, and then you have less money for that fiscal year. And so then you're tagging another couple ones that you want to fund in the following year, but with an even smaller pot because you've already pulled some of that money out to fund the applications from the previous year. So you just kind of get into this feedback loop where you keep robbing Peter
Yes,
to pay Paul.
Yep, it's always that's exactly right. I don't know about the robbing, but yeah, that's right. I think that's right. I think maybe I was misunderstanding that. You are consistently limiting the next fiscal year's award pool to more quickly fund, shovel ready projects that have been submitted. That's right.
So to Donna's point, you could have a situation where you dwindle it over time and suddenly there isn't, with level funding, there'd be, less and less money every year potentially. Yeah. I'm wondering about the second scenario. It sounds like this first scenario could be very challenging. I think there's some merit to it, but with level funding, I think it could be challenging. So in the second scenario, with just sort of a little bonus points for resubmitting applications or reapplying, how do folks feel about that one?
Elizabeth Nance had hers up too, but it went down. So,
well, I thought we were moving on, but I think my comment applies to this maybe as much as scenario 1. I think one of the challenge with going from one year to the next is things change. So maybe the application that they submitted, say this year, things have changed year over year. On the sort of flip side, if there's a project that didn't get funded for lack of, excuse me, just lack of funds, there was no good reason, but maybe there's some time sensitivity. I don't think that maybe it's not outside the realm to say on, not every time, but maybe if there's a particular application that there could be room to consider it the next year more strongly than you would have otherwise, if that makes sense.
And I think that's, yeah, a little bit what we're trying to get at with scenario 2 is giving a little leg up for reapplicants that had strong applications. For me, the biggest con there is that, you know, if somebody makes just such a big improvement and comes in with this an incredible application, they you know, they wouldn't get those bonus points. So that that's the biggest issue to me for this second scenario.
You have
Okay.
Lily and then Susan.
Oh, sorry,
Susie.
I can't, for some reason I can't see. Okay, I'll put, I didn't have my
Lily and then Susie. Yeah, go for
Yeah.
it.
I think two things that are coming to mind. I think the first is that any scenario, I think that changes the criteria for which applicants are chosen. I think significant work would need to be done in both making that language and decision making much more clear in the RFA, given that both RFAs just list now scores. And considering I think there's been a lot of conversation with the board of like how decisions are made and how we go about the review process, I think a really big overhaul and explaining that in a very transparent way in the RFA would definitely be needed. But I think on the back end, I think there should also be time and effort put into standardizing and writing down how these decisions are made. I think right now it happens a lot verbally, but I think an important part of like having this transparency and equity is that there's documentation to refer back to. And then I think that just the second thing, coming from just the grants and contracts realm, changes that are happening in the state with the way that we are working on our grants and contracts. We're having a lot of fiscal year changes coming up with our bulletins, is just also bringing in the appropriate people to maybe review some of these things, because this is a little bit of a deviation from, I think, a standard granting process is holding over using past fiscal year scoring, decision making to then like affect a future applicant. I think, from my side of things, I think I would feel more comfortable if there was someone like, whether it's the AG or Steve Collier, to like look over things and be like, even someone in the administration level, in the grants administration level, to look through and be like, yep, this is still appropriate and still feels in line with, how these bulletins and guidance are enacted in the state.
Great, thank you, Lily. And then we'll go to Susie, and then I think we'll probably need to move to the next strategy. Susie?
Awesome. I appreciate that perspective, Lily. I was literally just going to put out there an idea of kind of combining these first two into a hybrid consideration, which is that that first one that's sort of saying we would fund these through, again, Lily, a transparent, clear process. We just don't have the funds. What would it look like to say those get a bonus point next year, right? That's the criteria by which we award some kind of advantage, which again, Lily, I think that's what you're pointing out, is giving an advantage based on a previous year's application. Are we comfortable with that? It seems like 75 or higher is sort of it gets trickier, but I wondered about just thinking, oh, we would definitely have funded these as that benchmark. That was all.
That's great. And I think that was similar to what Elizabeth was saying as well. Yeah, I think some kind of combination could be considered. Just those really highest tier, like in that final bucket, like, oh, we wanted to fund them, we just couldn't. And then having them have a bonus, but being extremely clear and transparent in that. Okay, well, I think there's probably still some more discussion on this one, but we should move to the next one. So the next one was a two-stage or tiered application process. And this seemed, by the feedback we've had from the board, this seemed like there were several of you who really liked this idea. So I really welcome you to weigh in. But essentially, this is a lower lift application like an LOI kind of thing that would then get invited on a small percent, a smaller percentage, no more than double the amount of funding, and maybe even less. So, if you could fund 10 applicants, you'd maybe invite 15 or 20 for a full application. Next slide, please. So I guess I kind of just explained this a little bit, but determining what that stage one would look like, select applicants would be invited, and then could be the stage two could be supported potentially with some technical assistance. Next slide, please. So we have a lot of pros and cons on this one, and I really welcome you all to weigh in because I know you had a lot of thoughts on this. But the pros are, simplifies that stage one, makes a lower barrier to entry to putting in an application. You could address some technical issues early on, such as permitting and other key issues to address in that full application. And you could still use that holistic criteria to in that first process to figure out so you weren't saying like, oh, we're moving, 7 out of the 10, or 15 out of the 20 projects all in like this one region of the state as an example. You could balance some of that out early on. I see the biggest, thank you, Kathy. I see the biggest challenge to this one is getting enough good information early on to make a good decision of what goes forward. It can be hard with limited information to figure out what is really going to be a worthy project. So you would have to ask enough information. I think you would really, if we wanted to have a more equitable program, I think you would really need to ask a question about equity and financial need early on. Maybe it's just a financial cap or something, or some kind of, but I would strongly recommend that would be part of the first stage. So other cons are those that are not awarded after stage two will have a greater time submitting again, right? So that if they, there could be a combination here if you were to do this pathway where, if you invited 20 and you awarded 15, those, you could think about the rollover for some of them or giving them a bonus or something for that next year. Feedback available in stage one would be minimized. You just wouldn't have that level of feedback and critical suggestions that they could then improve for the next year. And they may not feel like they have enough time, enough space to even like really convey their project and the impacts of that project if it was such a shorter application. And then the process between the initial application and grant application, it would just lengthen because you'd have this, it's two tiers, and it could take more time. So thoughts on this one? I know that folks some people liked this idea. So would love to hear your thoughts. Do you have any other pros and cons to add? Any other considerations for this one? Ellen said we used to have the two-stage process.
Yeah, Erica, I was just gonna note, I put this in the chat. We have done two-stage before, so it's not brand new. We did it for the impact grant, so I would say that it was not, those were for higher dollar. Nothing about that stage was really intended to like make the process shorter. Like it was still a lengthy process for both applicants and staff. This could look like just repeating that, or it could look like something different. My thought is that something different would probably be more effective.
For the impact grants, the first stage application was basically the full application minus the financials. So it wasn't a simple application. There's a lot of information still gathered in stage one.
Right, but I think, to me, when I hear the potential of a two-stage process, I do think we should consider if it was for the smaller business enhancement grants, doing a simpler application overall. And then with the larger ones, we could make the LOI stage a possibility, and again, keep it simple so that we could at least cut down on the number of enterprises that were then having to go through the more lengthier process. I'm wanting in this particular, if we decide to go back to an LOI process, I think the bucket of funds matters, that what we apply it to.
So right now, though, Ellen, there isn't two business grants, right?
Correct,
So
but that doesn't
would,
mean it will always be that way.
correct. And I think that this would be a good time to think through, I mean, the equity aspects. I mean, we heard many people saying the application is really hard and I'm applying for $15,000 or $20,000 and this is like a huge application. And we do, the agency is doing a lot, I would say, around trying to simplify the application.
Yeah.
But you're saying further, like if, so like under a certain threshold, it would make a simpler application and then have the two-stage LOI.
I'm saying make it simple. If part of the intent here is to make it simpler across the board, that no
Right.
matter which buckets we might have in a given year based on how much money, the baseline is we want to have a simpler application for all. But then it is true that for larger dollar amounts, there is an amount of additional information that we need. And so going to an LOI for the larger buckets would allow us to, again, keep the initial one simple so we could at least pare things down. And then the second, the full application would be invited. And yes, we can still simplify that, but there is a certain amount of information that for larger dollar amounts, I think we still are going to want to see. Personally.
Yeah. Other thoughts on this one? Alex, I know you had put some comments in.
Tyler's
Oh,
hand is up, or maybe
sorry,
Tyler
I
and then
missed that.
Liz.
Sorry about that.
Thanks. Yeah, I think I just would probably just express caution on this idea a little bit, just in terms of like really thinking through how it would be a value add to anyone in the process, applicant and reviewers. I think one of the challenges in such a competitive environment, there's always a desire to have even more information than we get in the full application, to actually be able to discern who's going to be approved and not. So a simple always sounds good, but like I've seen this in a few other grant making scenarios where it's just like, oh, if we got a little more information, all of a sudden you're like 90% of the way to the full application and the pre-application. So I think that's something for us to think about. What would be the elements of that pre-application that would allow us to like cull the list? And if that's like lots and lots of information, then we're sort of just doing the full application. It's just sort of thoughts I'm having right now. Good idea, maybe extraordinarily difficult to actually execute to create the desired outcome.
Yeah, I think it would be. It is tricky, and there are a lot of pros and cons. Liz?
Yeah, I remember participating in the two-stage, and I think my worry would be that, especially for the smaller grants, that it would actually increase all of these feelings, because of that issue of like, it's really hard to make any decisions that you feel like are, informed without getting at least a good chunk of the information. And then people have to do it twice, essentially. And yeah, I think like I feel like a lot of these I think it's a very, very natural, logical thing to consider that two-stage thing because people have such intense feelings of like, I worked so hard on this, like, and then no one gets it. And like, we just need to figure out a way for this to take less human time. But I'm worried that it actually would take more human time and increase the feelings, which is not a reason not to try it. Like we've tried lots of different structures. Like we made intentional choices about reducing and eliminating match, eliminating the business plan. Those were choices that this board has already made that greatly increased like the review time required for everyone because it made there be a lot more applications. So I guess I'm saying some contradictory things right now, but I think we've made choices in the past to really try to address accessibility and making things simpler to apply that then make it a lot harder to make decisions. And that might be worth it as a try to respond to these suggestions. And it also might actually exacerbate them, and we might not know that without trying it again.
Yeah, and I think if you were to try this, I think you would to need to make it when the people that were invited to reapply, yeah, you could take their first amount of information and add to it, in terms of like resubmitting a whole application. You could stage it so you could say now give us these additional things versus, you know, such a brand new process. Any other final thoughts on this one? Okay. All right, we can move to the next one then. All right, so this one is
I'm
another.
wondering,
Yeah,
Erica, if
go
we
ahead,
should do
Elizabeth.
like, this isn't like a, I mean, I think this is like almost like a straw poll of like, oh, like gut check. Like, do people want to explore this further, or, maybe not until we have, more funding to do impact grants again, or just that would be helpful for me because I think a part of the June symposium, as we've all discussed, is going to be like really where the rubber meets the road on implementing a whole number of the recommendations. And I think these are some of the more complicated. But it would be, if people can just actually drop in the chat, like, yeah, just sort of like a yay, continue the conversation, nay, like not now. Don't pick this up now for the 2-stage.
Right, so up is further explore soon, and
Yeah.
down is
Nay. Yeah.
not don't explore it right now, especially for this next grant process. Great. As you do that, maybe we can start to move on. People can trickle in their thoughts about 2-stage. We'll go to the next one, and maybe we'll have time to loop back to our first one with a yay nay, but I don't want to do that right now. I want to have a little space between all the nays and yays. Okay, so let's talk about the subgranting model. So this came about because some of the biggest buckets of working lands entities in the state that are not currently very competitive. Maybe they're eligible, maybe they're not, but often they're just not very competitive. And also there was a strong equity component to them. One example is, immigrant farmers who are working on shared land. Others are various types of collective farms or community farms or food access focused farms or it could be a mutual aid project. It could be a firewood bank. And they aren't very enterprisey in nature. And so while they are working the lands and contributing to resilience, they're not necessarily making it, they're not scoring very high. And often these folks also have a variety of other barriers into the Working Lands program. As an example, the immigrant farmers who had, just a lot of barriers just even being able to put an application together. So the idea here is to take a chunk of money and have a sub-granting model. You could do it through the service provider grant, but maybe that wouldn't be the best entity. You'd need to have another bucket. And this would be a re-granting project. And you'd have to have some things aligned with Working Lands for the bigger goals, but it would be sub-granted out through a nonprofit or another entity. And then the next slide to go through a little bit more on what it would look like. I think I just kind of explained that. Yeah, I think I already explained that. Sorry. Next slide. Okay, so the pros of this are, again, it can fund those projects that are not necessarily competitive, but that still really add to that working landscape. You could really get rid of some of the bureaucratic, things that challenges that come with any type of more public fund, like grant, or where that goes through an agency with a lot of requirements. You could do some alternative types of format of applications and reporting models. It can really support the equity components as well. So the cons would be there may be some less control of the grant decision making, even with some parameters. Obviously the board wouldn't be making those decisions. You would still need to gather the funding impacts because it is money that the Working Lands is putting out there into the world. And even though there is a sub-grantee, and I didn't mention in the pros, organizations that are trusted by some of these businesses and communities as another pro there. But so some of these other organizations would still need to gather enough impact data. So then you could say to the legislature, we did this, funded these amazing projects through X, Y, and Z partners. It may have an overall impact on total acreage as an example, or market catalyst as an example. But there certainly could be other goals met of the Working Lands Initiative, Enterprise Initiative. Yeah, so, and it may require a new bucket of applications if it doesn't feel like it's a perfect fit within service providers, which then would, as a con, would maybe take money from both the current two grant programs. Ellen, do you want to just share what you wrote in there?
Yeah, is the expectation that the nonprofit that it would get granted to from the agency, from WLEB and the agency, in essence, processing a grant agreement to the NPO, who then puts it out, would that nonprofit be compensated for that work? I'm not sure why we would do this paying twice. And would a nonprofit actually be willing? I mean, there's a real cost to actually time and resources to actually process all the paperwork. So to me, it's why would we not just be doing this once, since we have such a great staff at the agency?
Well, I think that for one, there are just barriers when an agency, there's built-in bureaucracy. There's trusted relationships that organizations have with immigrants, as an example. There's, I think that what we heard with all the research we did, especially with our advisory committee, they felt like this could be a really great option to really invite more people into the process that currently would have a lot of barriers, and also be able to fund things that aren't typically eligible. So, to do a small program, yes, that could potentially be. We talked about that quite a bit, like some kind of smaller, mini grant program through Working Lands. And I think that the direction with all the people we spoke with, interviews, focus groups, et cetera, was that this could be a really great way to help increase equity, and also fund entities that typically wouldn't necessarily apply to Working Lands. And yes, I think that the admin costs would need to be sort of addressed. So that is definitely part of the conversation. And there are organizations, I think, interested in doing this. But yes, the admin piece would be important to think about. Liz. Oh, wait, I think somebody else's hand is up first. Sorry about that.
Yeah.
Lily, and then Liz.
Yeah, I just sort of wanted to speak a little bit to experience supporting the Farm to School program with offering something similar to this. They have a CSA program that they offer pretty much every fiscal year. And it in the past has been for early childhood educators to apply for very small grants. And from an agency perspective, like Claire said, it's quite the administrative burden to have, say, up to 15 or 20 mini grants, all that are around like $5,000 or less. And the documentation that is required from these ECEs can often be a huge barrier. So a big change that they made this year is actually having ECEs and nonprofits go in on a group application. So having either a nonprofit be a fiscal agent and represent several, from 5 to like over a dozen ECEs, or having, an ECE that feels like they're very well set up in the community to then partner and have essentially, a partner group application where they're going to take on sort of the fiscal responsibility, the documentation responsibility, and then, the collection of like grants and metrics. And I would say from like my perspective, I think for some nonprofits, like it makes sense of, what they could put in maybe for like an indirect cost to see then like the outcomes of, suddenly you have many dozen partners coming in together on an application that don't have to each individually go through this process that we go through for each grant agreement, for collecting documentation, for submitting interim reports, but instead centralizing it in a way that, yeah, I think if we're speaking about smaller, more impactful like mini grants, I feel like makes a lot of sense.
Thanks, Lily. Liz?
That was really helpful to hear, Lily. Some of the reactions I'm having include like everything from I love this idea to like how is this actually going to play out on the ground and will it achieve the goals, and also how widely would the strategy be used. I do think there's sometimes really compelling reasons to do stuff like this, and Lily, your example was helpful for that. I think the Working Lands program was set up with this like very commercial focus, which I think it should maintain. I also think a strategy around both like we're already trying to reach like really big businesses and really small businesses, but we haven't had like a strategy to reach the people that are like even smaller than small businesses for really good reasons. And like there's an argument to be made that we need a pipeline of producers. There's lots of people that would love to have a business, but like it's super risky. And being able to direct at least a small amount of support to super early stage work, I think could fit into like a holistic view of what is our charge. I think some of the things that will make this work or not work is like really like that administrative relationship when the rubber meets the road on the ground, what risk management, financial management, documentation, reporting, what that the agency would typically do will trickle down and might be needed. I think will really impact how that feels and if it is efficient or not. I think the stuff around relationship and trust would be mitigated by an internal by a third party nonprofit. Sorry, I'm being so long-winded. But my last point is there's a lot of organizations already doing grant making that is highly aligned with what Working Lands is doing. And I think my question would be, does that mean like NOFA's Family Farmer of the Month program is now eligible to apply to Working Lands to re-grant money? Because they have a great process that gets like a good amount of dollars out the door every year to farmers for very aligned purposes as Working Lands. Like we run an implementation grant program that gets grants out the door. Like a lot of organizations are kind of already doing this kind of grant making, and are we opening up to their applications too? Or are we like choosing a really select, focused type of project that like we would like to see come in for this?
Yeah, those are all really great points, Liz. And I think that that would have to be decided because, yeah, it could just be like, okay, great, everybody wants to do regranting. So I think there would definitely need to be some key parameters and goals for the program, which could even potentially, shift over time depending on what the key needs were. Other thoughts on this one before and I know we have limited time for the next discussion. We have one more to talk about, which is kind of a very technical one, the next one on need scoring. So, but I would love to hear more on this one. Maybe we can also go back and do a thumbs up or down for the first one we talked about and capture those. Actually, no, maybe we should vote on this one first. Okay, so other thoughts on this one? Did I miss any hands? No. All right. Okay, so we have one more to talk about, and we've actually talked about this next one quite a bit already, which is the restructuring the rubric around need. And I think, we talked about this a lot. I don't need to go too into it, but that the financial need part right now is only 5 points. I think you can actually go to the next slide, Aisha. So essentially, there's a variety of things that this could look like, and we have that the sub document, one of the many additional documents we created that are linked in the current draft of the recommendations document that was all going through it. The first part of it was equity scoring, and then the second part was need. So a few different ideas there were to basically restructure it. So currently it's about 10 points more on viability and 5 points on need. So either balance those or do 5 on viability and 10 points on financial needs. So really and also thinking about some kind of cap. So is there eligibility, criteria that I think there's some details that are tricky about that one because it may differ, a sawmill versus a farm might have a different, so the businesses it might be a different amount for businesses, but just as an example, USDA typically would have, I think it's a $900,000 adjusted gross income, so not gross income, but adjusted gross income as an example. So most federal grants have some kind of scoring, or sorry, some kind of income eligibility criteria, a cap there. So yes, it can look different ways, but really financial need, adding really clear, like as Lily was saying earlier, anything we do, we have to reflect back and make sure that everything is very clear in the RFA. And this first one is really just expanding the definition of financial need through a variety of mechanisms. And I think you can go to the next slide, Aisha. Unless we want to go into those details. This is like a lot of detail right now. And I know through this once already. But these are just sort of the recommendations that we gave in that document. And maybe we don't even need to go through them all right now. Oh, actually, no, that there is pros and cons on this we might need to talk about. So for targeted application questions on financial need, suggesting, that they really have an opportunity. They have a little opportunity right now to explain, but even further expanding on that a little bit, and talking about what their barriers are, but then obviously putting in some specifics on those barriers that they've had. And the pros of that are more specific information is asked for which center's financial need. I think this is something that, comes from sort of trauma-informed best practices, but, asking anybody about what their, talk about your challenges, and this is probably more relevant to the equity scoring part of the application that we've made some suggestions for, but anytime you ask about that, it can be hard to talk about sometimes your systemic barriers in particular, or challenges that you've had. Some people don't want to talk about their challenges that they've had to access, the struggles that they've had, or sometimes this may be a lot of information for someone to actually even just give. So trying to get enough information to make a good financial need score, but then it's also, you sort of balance it out with how much information are you actually asking them. Next slide. And then this goes through some of the options on the financial need indicators. So like a soft threshold, where, you could have some ranges for businesses, as I mentioned earlier. There's also some targeting, prioritizing businesses with limited capital, without sort of any kind of income cap. And then C would be a very hard cap. Like if you are above this, then you can't apply at all. So those are the three pieces there. And then move to the next slide, please. And so these are just sort of the general pros and cons of this need-based scoring. The funding will flow where it's most needed. It can reduce risk of funding businesses that don't necessarily need funding from taxpayers, right? Helps increase capital access for businesses that may have faced those barriers. You can create some clear eligibility criteria, and a soft income threshold can allow targeting financial needs without necessarily, eliminating applicants with a hard cap if you went that route. The cons are business viability scores are reduced to accommodate for higher financial need scores, increases the amount of information being requested. As I already mentioned, the multi-part questions, there's a lot there. So yeah, I think we'd really need to be, it's that balance of getting enough information, which can make it more of a burden, which we don't want to do. And then, I think the hard income cap went that route. We just need to be really sensitive to not excluding anybody who actually has equity needs, because you know, a business can maybe look good on even their adjusted gross income, but their net income can be extraordinarily low. I think dairy farming is maybe a good example of that. And then soft income thresholds may be confusing, may be hard to be transparent about what that is. Yeah, so I think that there's some things that could happen with need. I think Aisha and I strongly recommend giving more points allocated to financial need, in the very least balancing that out of those 15 current points and increasing some of the score for financial need. But there's these, I think we'd also recommend some kind of cap, but there's a lot of consideration there as to not exclude somebody and inadvertently, unintentionally have negative impacts on equity. So, but we have only a couple more minutes, but thoughts on this one? Anything that stands out as like, we should definitely do that, or we should definitely not do that? Or just quite general questions?
I'll just add, I think of all the recommendations, this one feels the most compelling to me. It feels like it needs a lot more thoughtfulness and discussion around how to operationalize it. But I have so many examples in my mind of review conversations that we've had. Like we turned Red Hen down this year because we felt like they were, a big successful enterprise that had the money to fund that project. So I think there's like a handful of next steps to kind of think about the think about how to operate. Yeah, think about how to implement this. And I think I'm thinking too about like Ellen's capital continuum chart too, and like asking this question of like, what should a grant be for in the ecosystem of financing, and aligning our scoring and our rubric and our questions with our understanding of where it fits in that capital continuum, is a worthy exercise in my mind. So I don't, I think this underlying a lot of this is just the challenge of Working Lands is trying to do so many different things for so many different people. And if we can kind of narrow in a little bit around like asking folks to answer more of the questions around financial need and being more clear around what a grant, like, what gap that should be filling, or what kind of appropriateness it is for certain projects, and being very transparent about that feels really valuable. We're asking some of those questions now, but as a reviewer, I've often felt underwhelmed by people's responses to the financial need questions of like, well, I don't want to get to a bank, or I just can't take on more debt. Like there's just a lack of substance there to make a real decision around that response. And while I see the increased burden of asking more questions there and asking for more information, I just feel like it would be really valuable to have some more information around like, did you investigate loans, like having them kind of expand on some of that. So those are my thoughts.
Thank you, Trevor. I think Liz, you have your hand up.
Yeah, though I feel like I've been talking a lot. And if you want to pause and see if anyone else is wanting to come in, I'll wait.
Would anyone else like to share before Liz? I think you're good, Liz. Thanks.
I guess I'll just say that this one is hard, even for my team and board, when we are reviewing grants for folks who have spent 6 to 18 months doing like intensive business planning and financial planning with us. So there's not a world in which the responsibility of determining need is not complex and hard and a large responsibility. But I deeply appreciate the suggestions to make this more clear and more something that addresses some of the concerns that keep coming up. I think I agree that that feels needed because it's just really hard for reviewers to know how to score these. And I think the point about like this grant is trying to achieve so much is the biggest barrier for being able to set clear criteria around this, because like historically we have actually really wanted to fund some bigger businesses as long as they can clearly demonstrate like the strong positive impact that they'll have on the whole ecosystem. And like I think it remains important for Working Lands to be able to invest in those like aggregation type businesses that are going to be hopefully a lot bigger than 900,000, or like your examples below around sawmills or loggers. Like we just have so many like high dollar cash flow, low profitability in this sector. So being really careful around that. And I wonder if there's a way to elicit like more of the strategy behind it. Like we don't want this grant to only fund really financially insecure businesses, because I think that would be highly irresponsible. And like this is taxpayer money that's supposed to have like a multiplier, like economic and community development effect. So how do we hold all those things? And I don't know what the answer is.
Yeah.
But I think like some different examples or like slightly different categories to like try to get people to share more. Like I just don't want a loan is probably not the most compelling answer, but like I have reviewed my list of capital needs. I've spoken with my lender. These are the kinds of projects that I go after for debt. This is how much debt I can take on. These are the kinds of projects that like make more sense for this grant. I've really thought about it. How can we get to a place where we can be getting that level of information? That's like, it's more about, was this an intentional decision where the applicant understands that this is like taxpayer money and we have really hard decisions to make. So like also help us make those decisions by showing what you've thought through to get here. I truly don't know. I'm struggling with the same question in my own program right now. And I'm like, this is all really helpful to think about for me too.
And I think from that taxpayer perspective, yeah, you want to give it, reduce the risk so you're not wasting the money, and you don't want, I don't want my taxpayer going to, to businesses who don't need it. I mean, we know that happens all the time, even at the federal level, even with caps. So I think that from a taxpayer accountability perspective, it's both sides of the coin, which is challenging. Okay, well, this was helpful. Again, I know this is really nothing seems like an easy solution when it comes to this work.
Erica, can we have Tyler
Oh,
go?
sorry. Yes, I'm so sorry, Tyler. Go ahead.
Thanks. Yeah, I think I was probably mostly going to echo. I think this is incredibly important and incredibly difficult category to sleuth out. I mean, I think just my mind goes to maybe we could pair it with certain stages of business, like early stage business development, where need is maybe a little clearer to articulate. And then it just gets me thinking about if we want to push further into this, if we can get really, really clear. The loan one's a great example. Like no one wants a loan if they can get a grant, right? So that's just like a really basic concept. And so if we want you to exhaust your options getting loans, we need to compel that to be assessing needs. Like you need to give us a denial letter from one or more lenders, something very specific. Otherwise, the application is designed such that like the phrasing and wording about how you did or didn't pursue other options can get quite complicated to tease out in the review process. So I do wonder if there's also like also want to maybe reward efficiencies in businesses. And so sometimes like there's lots of reasons for business need that can get beyond us pretty quickly. So I do wonder if it's like startup, early stage development, good proof of concept. Yeah, like if there's something there that we could kind of think about attaching need more fully to make it a little easier to define and assess what we mean here.
Okay, that's helpful. Well, all this has been really helpful. We'll continue to work over this next month with Trevor, Elizabeth, and Claire. And just to let you know, we are making kind of a higher level public facing plan that will be coming from InCommon report, InCommon group. Sorry. And then we will still have sort of the detailed documents all sort of available with that have a lot more information in them. So we won't lose any of those documents. They'll continue to be available to all of you. But we are putting together kind of a higher level public facing report. Yeah, so stay tuned on next steps. Anything, Elizabeth, Claire, Trevor, that I missed? I know we're also over time. So thanks everyone for your time today.
Thank you. I think my brain hurts after all of that. I'm not sure about others, but that was a lot of information. I appreciate all the work that's gone into it. Definitely get us thinking.
Yeah, thank you.
Any other questions before we let them go?
Feel free to email anytime too, if you have any follow-up thoughts as we
Excellent.
continue to work. Okay, thanks everyone.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye. A lot of food for thought. Oof. All right, so it's 11:57 and I don't see any public for comment. And if we'd like to be out on time, I see a finger from Claire. Does that mean you got a question, Claire?
Nope. We're good.
You're good? Okay. Thought I was being paused. Excellent. So if we wish to be dismissed, we will need a motion to adjourn. Don't be shy. Thank you, Donna. Do we have a second? Thank you,
This is David.
Tyler.
I'll second it.
Excellent. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, nay. Motion carries and you shall be dismissed. Thank you all. Have a great day.
Thanks, everybody. Good meeting.
Enjoy the
Thank you.
warmth.
Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.